Okay, guys, so this is our third and final diary entry that we're working on in this video. So we already did one from January 1943. We did one from November 8th, 1943. And our final one is from November 11th, 1943. So it just follows a few days after this other one that we read. So this one, you can see it does have a lot of questions. It has 7 questions, but really that's because Anne is super descriptive in this diary entry, and I want you to take apart some of her descriptions. So I'm going to show you how I have it pulled up here in the text. It's right after the other one. So the November 8th one ends and the November 11th one begins, November 11th, 1943. And if you see when she starts off talking to her diary, who she named Kitty, she says, "Dearest Kitty, I have a good title for this chapter, Ode to My Fountain Pen, in Memoriam." I want to talk to you about what that means because I don't want to keep reading without you knowing that ode. Let's go back to your study questions. It tells you right here that an ode is a poem dedicated to someone or something. So many times, like at a funeral or a celebration of life service, you might hear somebody deliver an ode. Like if I had an ode to my mom, it would be a poem that I dedicated to her. Okay, so that tells me that this is kind of strange because she's calling this entry in her diary, this chapter entry, she's calling it an ode to her fountain pen. So it's in dedication to her fountain pen. That's kind of strange. Let's make sure we know what a fountain pen is. So here are some images of a fountain pen. You can see it just has a different type of ink. It's not like a ballpoint pen like we use today. Ode to her fountain pen. Why would she dedicate a diary entry to her fountain pen? And then it says, underneath that, it says in memoriam. It tells you here, in memoriam is a phrase that usually is used at funerals or memorial services for the dead. It means in memory of, right? And then it says, well, knowing these two definitions, why would Anne title this part of her diary, Ode to My Fountain Pen? So poem dedicated to my fountain pen, or a prose passage piece dedicated to my fountain pen in memoriam. Like rest in peace sort of thing. Why would she do that? So we're going to have to figure out what happened to her fountain pen, why she's dedicating this diary entry to it, because apparently it has died, right? That's sort of some personification. She's treating it like a person who has died, and now we're going to have a memorial for it. So let's see what she says. Let me zoom in a little bit so you can see a little bit better on my screen in case you're following there. My fountain pen was always one of my most prized possessions. I valued it highly, especially because it had a thick nib, and I can only write neatly with thick nibs. It has led a long and interesting fountain pen life, which I will summarize below. I guess she's saying she likes one with thick points. She can write better, but she's saying her pen led a long, interesting fountain pen life. Let's see what life it lived. It says, when I was 9, my fountain pen, packed in cotton, arrived as a sample of no commercial value, all the way from Aachen. Aachen, it says here, is a city in Germany, where my grandmother, the kindly donor, used to live. I lay in bed with the flu while the February winds howled around the apartment house. This splendid means like super magnificent. This splendid fountain pen came in a red leather case, and I showed it to my girlfriends the first chance I got. Me, Anne Frank, the proud owner of a fountain pen. So she's saying that she got this prized possession when she was 9 years old. It came as a sample from a city in Germany. A sample, it just means like kind of like pins that like, businesses make a pin with their name on it. It was just like a pin that came, but she seems to think it was super beautiful, right? A splendid pen. It did have a red leather case, right? And she felt super fancy. She showed it to all her friends at school. Me, Anne Frank, the proud owner of a fountain pen. When I was 10, I was allowed to take the pen to school. And to my surprise, the teacher even let me write with it. When I was 11, however, my treasure had to be tucked away again because my 6th grade teacher allowed us to use only school pens and ink pots. When I was 12, I started at the Jewish Lyceum. It's kind of like a middle or high school. And my fountain pen was given a new case in honor of the occasion. Not only did it have room for a pencil, it also had a zipper, which was much more impressive. When I was 13, the fountain pen went with me to the annex. She brought it to where she's hiding. So when she was 13, that pen, which has been her prized possession since she was 9 years old, it's come with her. She was able to bring it to the annex at age 13. Oh, that's cool. It's in hiding with her. When I was 13, the fountain pen went with me to the annex, and together we've raced through countless diaries and compositions. I had turned 14, and my fountain pen was enjoying the last year of its life with me when dot dot dot. Right? It's almost like in a movie when it goes black screen to be continued because she just gave us this cliffhanger. What? Your fountain pen was enjoying the last year of its life. What happened to it? So I guess at age 13, she brought it in the annex. She's been writing in the diaries with it. So I guess that might explain also why it's so special to her. It's not just a random thing that she brought. I mean, imagine, Anne Frank, you can't bring like all of your favorite stuff to the annex. Like you probably can only bring one bag, right? So what are you going to put in there? Some clothes, I guess the diary, the pen, so you can write with something. So this is not just any old possession. It's like a link to her life before. It's something that she's going to use to write down her thoughts in her diary. It's something that's been with her, and she hopes that it will continue to be with her. So it's like an important thing, not just like a random pen or pencil that we find on the floor, like at Fort Myers Middle, right? So I think it's become like a friend to her. And then she turned 14, and her fountain pen was enjoying the last year of its life. Dun, dun, dun. That ellipses can mean like suspense, right? Or something that you're going to find out about soon. I guess this is what happened. She said, it was just after 5 on Friday afternoon. I came out of my room and was about to sit down at the table to write when I was roughly pushed to one side to make room for my sister Margot and father, who wanted to practice their Latin. The fountain pen remained unused on the table while its owner, that is Anne, sighing, was forced to make do with a very tiny corner of the table where she began rubbing beans. That's how we remove mold from the beans and restore them to their original state. Let me make sure you understand what's happening here. Okay, so Friday night, Anne sits down, or Friday afternoon, she's excited to write with her pen for a while, probably in her diary. Then she has to move because her sister and dad want to use the table to practice Latin. I guess they're trying to stay up on their schoolwork or stay, with sharp minds. And so she had to leave her fountain pen on the table, right? And Anne had to go to the little corner of the table and rub beans. So if you recall from the annex videos we watched the other day, the food supply was really small and sometimes their food was not in great shape. So here they've got beans that have mold on it. So she's rubbing the mold off the beans to get them fresher for cooking, right? Then it says, at 5:45, I swept the floor, dumped the dirt into a newspaper along with the rotten beans, and tossed it into the stove. A giant flame shot up, and I thought it was wonderful that the stove, which had been gasping its last breath, had made such a miraculous recovery. All was quiet again. The Latin students had left, and I sat down at the table to pick up where I'd left off. But no matter where I looked, my fountain pen was nowhere in sight. I took another look. Margot looked, mother looked, father looked, Dussel looked, but it had vanished. Maybe it fell into the stove along with the beans, Margot suggested. No, it couldn't have, I replied. But that evening, when my fountain pen still hadn't turned up, we all assumed it had been burned, especially because celluloid is highly inflammable. Our darkest fears were confirmed the next day when father went to empty the stove and discovered the clip used to fasten the pen to a pocket among the ashes. Not a trace of the gold nib was left. It must have melted into stone, father conjectured, sort of like a guess he made. Oh, I'm left with one consolation, small though it may be. My fountain pen was cremated, just as I would like to be someday. This word cremated, you've probably heard it before in relation to people who have passed away. Cremated means burned to ashes. Some people choose to be buried in a casket. Others want to be cremated or have their bodies burned and their ashes remain behind to be kept by a family member or scattered somewhere. So Anne has lost her poor pen and she's really sad about it. But she says, I have one consolation, one thing that consoles me and makes me feel better. At least my fountain pen was cremated like I would like to be someday. Oh, it's sort of like a weird last sentence because it's sort of clever and funny to think of her pen being cremated. She's like, oh, well, at least it was cremated like I'll be someday. Like making a funny comparison, but it's also kind of morbid. Morbid means like something like, it's like if you call somebody morbid, it's like they're thinking a lot about death when they really shouldn't be. Like here we have just this young girl, age 14 now, thinking about how she wants to be cremated, which is also kind of eerie since we know that a lot of people in the Holocaust were cremated in the concentration camps. But let's make sure we understood what happened to the pen. So remember, she was there. Then her sister and father had to practice their Latin. And so Anne had to go to the corner of the table and work on getting the beans ready. And then look what happened. She dumped the dirt into a newspaper along with the rotten beans and tossed it into the stove. So it's like all the trash she has left over from the beans, like the junk that she rubbed off of them, the newspaper where she was collecting all the scraps, the rotten beans. She tosses that big heap into the stove. Well, apparently, guess what was in the newspaper, right? Or what got folded up with the newspaper and all the rotten beans? I guess the pin. Because look, when she threw that on the stove, this big flame shot up, right? And Anne was like, "Oh, that's good. Our stove hasn't been working very well, right? It's been gasping its last breath. I guess now it's recovered, right? That's great. A big flame." Well, I guess the flame was probably from the pin catching on fire, right? And so later when she looks for her pin, it's nowhere in sight. Nobody can find it. Margot says, "Maybe it fell in the stove." Anne's like, "No way, Jose. That couldn't have happened." But then the next day, what does the father find when he empties the stove? He finds the clip, right? So let's go back to our pins here. So sometimes they have like a little clip, right, to fasten it to your pocket or something so you can hold on to that pin. So the gold nib is gone. That's been burned. But he does find the clip, which seems to be proof it fell into the stove, all her prized possession. And so Dad says the rest of it must have melted. And Anne's like, "Well, at least it was cremated like I'd like to be someday." All right. So this diary entry is different from the other ones because it's sort of a little more peppy. It's a little more jovial, a little more funny. You can see she has a sense of humor and she's kind of clever with the way that she's written about her pin. She's dedicated this diary entry to it. "Ode to my pin in memory of you." Right. It's almost like delivering a funeral service for the pin. So you can see she's got a sense of humor and is kind of clever. But it also makes me feel sad for her, right? Because one of her only possessions from the outside world that she brought with her has been burned up in the stove, right? So at this point, I'd like you to go back to your questions. It's going to ask you some things about the title of this diary entry, how it was organized in the first paragraphs, which is like when she was giving all these sentences like when I was 9, when I was 10, when I was 11, when I was 12. What kind of organization is that? It's going to ask you about the ellipses that she used right here at the end of this paragraph, why you think she used the ... It's also going to say, ask you to talk about that part where the pin is enjoying the last year of its life. And I want you to discuss that personification in here. And then it asks you to just sort of run through the whole episode with the stove. What exactly happened? Where is the pin? What happened to it? And then finally, how does she compare herself to the pin? Okay. I do want to see if I can find a picture really quick. Let me see if I can find one that would show like what the oven would have looked like. No, that's terrible. Not that one. That is terrible. Well, we'll go ahead and stop right there.